To understand gains from trade, we want to understand the difference between absolute advantage and comparative advantage. An individual is said to have an absolute advantage in an activity if he or she can do it better than other people. Having an absolute advantage is not the same as having a comparative advantage. An individual has a comparative advantage in producing a good or service if the opportunity cost of producing the good or service is lower for the individual than other people. Opportunity cost is defined as what you give up to get something else. We can use the production possibility frontier to examine the opportunity cost of production of various goods and services. In this example, Tom has a production possibility frontier where he can use all of his time to collect coconuts, or he can use all of his time to fish. If Tom fishes, he will collect 40 fish in a given period of time. He will collect 40 fish in a given period of time and 0 coconuts. If, on the other hand, Tom decides to use all of his time to collect coconuts, he will collect 30 coconuts but 0 fish. It's likely that Tom would consume some consumption point along his production possibility frontier, where the production possibility frontier represents the maximum number of goods or services that can be produced, given current level of resources and technology. So Tom chooses a point along his production possibility frontier, such as 9 coconuts and 28 fish. To calculate Tom's comparative advantage, we first have to understand his opportunity cost of production. What does he give up in order to produce another good? So what does Tom give up if he produces 40 fish? If he produces 40 fish, he gives up all of his coconuts. So he gives up 30 coconuts. In order for Tom to gain from trade, there must be someone for him to trade with. So now we will introduce Hank. Hank is not as good at doing either activity as Tom is. Where Tom can collect 40 fish in a given period of time, Hank can only produce 10. Where Tom can collect 30 coconuts in a given period of time, Hank can only collect 20. So according to absolute advantage, the ability to do something better than someone else, Tom has an absolute advantage in both the production of fish and the production of coconuts. But in order to determine comparative advantage, we need to look at Tom's opportunity cost of producing 2 goods compared to Hank's opportunity cost of producing the 2 goods. So in order to examine Hank's opportunity cost of producing fish, we ask the question, how many coconuts does Hank give up in order to collect his fish? In order to collect 10 fish, Hank will give up 20 coconuts, and vice versa. In order to collect 20 coconuts, Hank would have to give up 10 fish. Once again, the opportunity cost of production is a measure of what is given up relative to what one gets. When we say what one gets, we mean what are they going to produce. So in order to produce fish, if we examine Tom's opportunity cost of production, the numbers in this example are 30 coconuts given up when Tom collects 40 fish. On the other hand, to examine Tom's opportunity cost of production, Tom collects 30 coconuts, but in order to do so, he must give up 40 fish. So opportunity cost is a ratio of the number given up relative to the number the individual gets. Next, we look at Hank's opportunity cost of production. Let me pause here and have you evaluate Hank's opportunity cost of production. Go back and look at the numbers for Hank's production possibility frontier. Determine the number Hank is going to give up relative to the number that Hank is going to get when he produces fish, and do the same thing for Hank's production of coconuts. And when you're ready, proceed to the next slide to see the solution. And here is the solution. We took the number of coconuts that Hank would give up, 20 coconuts, if he were to get his fish, 10 fish. So Hank's opportunity cost of producing fish is 20 over 10. For Hank's opportunity cost of coconuts, the number of fish given up is 10, and the number of coconuts Hank would get is 20. So Hank's opportunity cost of producing coconuts is 20 over 10. The next step is to evaluate who has the comparative advantage in the production of a good. In order to compare these numbers, we can reduce them. Our example here is that 30 over 40 reduces to 3 over 4, or 3/4 of a coconut. Each fish that Tom collects means that he must give up 3/4 of a coconut. In order for Hank to collect one fish, his opportunity cost of production was 20 over 10, which reduces to 2. So each one fish costs Hank 2 coconuts. Remember, an individual has a comparative advantage in producing a good or service when they have a lower opportunity cost of producing the good or service compared to another. 3/4 of a coconut is less than 2 coconuts given up by Hank, so therefore Tom should catch fish for both of them, because his opportunity cost of a fish in terms of coconuts not gathered is only 3/4 of a coconut compared to 2 coconuts for Hank. Next, we can examine who has a comparative advantage in the collection of coconuts. Tom's opportunity cost of coconuts is 4/3 of a fish, while Hank's is only half. So therefore, Hank should collect coconuts for both of them because his opportunity cost of a coconut in terms of a fish not caught is only 1/2 of a fish compared to 4/3 of a fish for Tom. This leads us into our conclusion regarding specialization and trade. Adam Smith, in his book The Wealth of Nations, published in 1777, discussed the idea that if we each specialize in what we have a comparative advantage in, and then trade for the rest, everyone will be better off. Both castaways are better off when they each specialize in what they are good at and trade. It's a good idea for Tom to catch the fish for both of them because his opportunity cost of a fish in terms of coconuts not gathered is only 3/4 of a coconut versus 2 coconuts for Hank. Correspondingly, it's a good idea for Hank to gather coconuts for both of them. Let's make the assumption that the coconuts and fish trade 1 for 1. In this situation, if Tom collects 40 fish and then trades 10 of them away to Hank in exchange for 10 coconuts, we can see that Tom's consumption with trade is beyond his production possibility frontier, a point that was otherwise unattainable. And so we can conclude that Tom is better off. When we examine Hank's outcome, assuming that Hank collects 20 coconuts for both of them, he trades 10 of his coconuts away to Tom in exchange for 10 fish that Tom has collected. And we can see once again that the consumption point with trade of 10 fish and 10 coconuts is beyond Hank's production possibility frontier. So Hank can consume at a point that he was unable to produce if he was self-sufficient. So once again, we can conclude that Hank is better off with specialization and trade. This concludes this section.